Now I'm excited to introduce our keynote speaker, Guy Benson, who will be joined by Brent as a moderator for a Riverside chat. Riverside chats are Dairyland's version of a fireside chat. Guy is the political editor of townhall.com, a Fox News contributor, and host of the nationally syndicated Guy Benson Show. He also co-authored End of Discussion. He has been a familiar voice on the Hugh Hewitt Show and NPR's All Things Considered. Guy served as a media fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institution and a visiting fellow at Harvard's Institute of Politics. An avid sports fan, Guy covered Big Ten college athletics during his on-air career. He graduated with honors from Northwestern University's School of Journalism. Please welcome our keynote, Guy Benson, and moderator, Brent Ridge.
Well, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We had a great dinner last night, and got to meet our Bayfield members, which were a great cross-section of our membership, and learned a bit about you, which is fantastic, and you've just been gracious and so open about coordinating schedules, things like that. So I thought we'd give you a chance to open with a few things before I dive into the questions.
No, I appreciate that, and thanks so much for having me. I just want to say a couple things out of the gate. First, I've grown in the last few years to develop a newfound appreciation for kind introductions because I do Greg Gutfeld's show on a regular basis. So for those of you who laughed, you get the joke, right? You watch Gutfeld from time to time. For those of you who may not know, I'll explain real quick why there's a distinction between introductions and kind introductions. So at Fox News, where I work, our 10 p.m. Eastern show is hosted by Greg Gutfeld. It's sort of a comedy, political type, very loose environment. And he's the host, Greg, and then there's 4 guests who are there for the whole hour. And usually once or twice a month, they ask me to join the panel in New York, and it's a lot of fun and also terrifying. Because at the beginning of the show, Greg does a whole monologue of whatever he wants to say. And then he goes around the horn and introduces each guest with a line that someone else has written, and you have no idea what he's going to say, and it's always, shall we say, untraditional. So I'll give you an example, and don't get mad at me, this is just quoting him. Recently I was on the show, and he said, quote, "If he looked any younger, he'd be sitting in Kevin Spacey's lap." Fox News contributor Guy Benson. And you don't know how to react to that, right? There's a camera zoomed in on your face, and there's like 3 million people watching, and so you just take it. He made a Diddy-related joke as well. It's like way too soon. So kind introductions, appropriate introductions, are things that I really cherish these days. The second thing I want to just quickly say is mention my affinity, my growing affinity for the state of Wisconsin. I know most of you are from Wisconsin here, not all of you. I've just happened to be in your state so much over the last couple of years. It's been almost unusual, very strange how often I've been returning to the Badger State for various reasons. One of the reasons was, and we can maybe get into this in the Q&A later, I was at a debate, a presidential debate, back in, would it have been 2023, and I had a moment in Milwaukee where the debate was held with an Uber driver that gave me a very early insight, I think, into how the election was going to go the following year, i.e. 2024. So perhaps we'll come back to that. The other reason why I have a special place in my heart for Wisconsin is that my son was born here in Madison in late 2023, and it was this amazing thing. It was my first child, and I remember he arrived in the world, and it was a long night and very stressful, and many of you are parents, you remember the first time. I was hoping that the hospital had the Big Ten network so I could watch some football, and they did, because it was Wisconsin. What a wonderful miracle, in addition to the miracle of my son, of course. And that first night, we were exhausted, we were very hungry, and I thought to myself, we should celebrate. I said, let's find cheese curds somewhere. They must exist. And I said, let's go get some booze. because Wisconsin, I mean, you know, there's booze everywhere in Wisconsin. So I said, surely. So my favorite comedy on TV of all time was a show called Arrested Development. And the mother in the show is this matriarch of a successful family, a high-functioning alcoholic. The family loses all of its money, but she's still very pretentious. And in one scene, she's at a hospital because someone's having health trouble. And she looks around, she says, well, if anyone needs me, I'll be at the hospital bar. And her son says, Mother, there is no hospital bar. She said, this is why people hate hospitals. So I thought to myself, you know, if there's anywhere in the country that might have a hospital bar, it would be in the great state of Wisconsin. So I went to the nurse. I said, nurse, is there a bar here by any chance? She said, great question, which I thought was hilarious, because it really shouldn't be a great question, actually. It's a great question. She's like, no, unfortunately, it's not legal. But she told me where there was a liquor store, so I smuggled in some Spotted Cow. I know that's politically controversial, but it is delicious beer, so don't boo me yet. And we had a six-pack. We may have had to give one of them to the nurses as a bribe to get the six-pack in and some cheese curds, and like that was the first day of my son's existence in this state. So we'll see if he becomes a Packers fan. I don't know about that. So it is, of course, a pleasure to be back on the other side of the state. I've never been to La Crosse. What an incredible community. The hotel, the Charmant Hotel, the chocolate factory, this is like a magic. I feel like Willy Wonka. So I've got to come back here at some point. But for now, I am just delighted to spend the next few minutes with you talking about politics. And we're going to get to some questions. I just want to give the disclaimer out of the gate that my politics are center-right. I am much more of a conservative. I am skeptical of the president on some things. I'm not a full, all-in, always Trump person. I'm not a never Trump person. I'm a sometimes Trump person. So you can take all of my analysis and opinions with that grain of salt. I'm sure there's some disagreement in the room. Try not to heckle. I mean, I can handle it, but I don't want to embarrass you. So let's do some questions, then some questions from the audience, and this will be fun.
Well, it's delightful to have you. And I will agree with the first half of Gutfeld's introduction. The young part, the second part, I have no opinion.
Got carded.
Yeah. So last night at the waterfront, we had some senior managers there. The Bayfield team was there, and there was only one person that was carded. It was Guy Benson.
It absolutely made my day. I just turned 40, and you're like, oh man, that snuck up on me. So to be unironically carded was just a delight. Maybe that's why I'm in such a good mood today. It's like, I was carded yesterday, even with some gray flecks in my beard. Thank you, delightful waitress.
I had never seen an adult man so happy. It was good to see. Well, we're going to dive into some questions, but I'd like the audience to think about some questions as we get near the end, because I think we'll have a few minutes for questions. So you mentioned President Trump. He is now a few months into Trump 2.0. How does Trump 2.0 differ from his first term?
Well, I think where we should start on that question is fundamentally a huge difference this time versus last time is this time they were expecting to win. Last time they were not. Let me tell you two quick stories about that. In 2016, I was at Fox on election night in New York, and the complete expectation of virtually everyone there was that Hillary Clinton was going to win the election. That was very much the expectation of the Clinton campaign. They famously were popping champagne on the campaign plane that morning, which is some bad karma. And we all know what happened. Around 6 p.m. Eastern time, before any of the polls had closed, there were surrogates and representatives from both the Clinton and Trump campaigns who were milling around. They were in the green room. They were talking to us. And the Democrats were over the moon. They were not only convinced they were going to win, that they were going to win big. I remember one woman told me, we've got Florida. We think we've got Florida in the bag by 3 or 4 points. Not true. But they were expecting a huge win. The Trump people in the room were pre-spinning the loss. They were already blaming other people for why Trump was about to lose, which of course he didn't. And over the course of the evening, as things started to change, actually Wisconsin played a huge part in my mindset, because it took a second to realize, oh wait, this is actually maybe going to happen. I was sitting next to George Will and a guy called Steve Hayes, who's from Wisconsin, and he knows Wisconsin politics very well. And I was on Twitter, I kept looking at the updates, not even on the presidential side, but on the Senate race in this state. It was Ron Johnson's race. And he had been written off by the party. They pulled his funding, the triage, like just sort of, left to the wolves. And I kept seeing that he was ahead. And I turned to Steve, I said, you know Wisconsin politics, Steve, like, are we waiting on Madison votes or Milwaukee County? What's going on here? He said, oh no, Ron Johnson won. I said, what do you mean? Who called that? He said, I'm calling it. I know the state. Ron Johnson's going to win. I said, holy cow. He said, Trump's going to win. I said, Donald Trump? He's going to win Wisconsin? He said, yeah. I said, okay, this evening is going unexpectedly. So flash forward a couple hours. A friend of mine, whose name you would know, in high-level Republican politics, was at the Trump victory party in New York that night. And it was, again, a fully anticipated non-victory party, right? That's what they were expecting. And around maybe 10 p.m. Eastern time, this guy gets pulled into a room frantically with a small number of people. They said, no one wrote a victory speech. We need to write one right now. They didn't even bother to write a victory speech. So when if you ever go back and watch, there are these montages of sort of the media coming to the realization that they might lose their party, the Democrats, and this sort of like this meltdown. And then Trump and his family walk out on stage that night. They have this dazed look, especially Melania. She's like, I did not sign up for this, but like, your first lady now, congrats, surprise. They were stunned. And therefore, Trump 1.0, there was a huge learning curve of like staffing up and who are we going to populate this administration with. They weren't really ready, honestly. They weren't expecting this. Trump 2.0, despite, I would say, especially after the first month or so, some of the chaos, I think Trump sort of thrives in chaos. He likes chaos. I don't love chaos as much, but he does. But for the first, it's like in football, where the offensive coordinator has designed an entire first drive, like they'll choreograph the first drive down to a T and they'll practice it. This time, the incoming Trump administration actually did that. They were prepared, they were ready to win. They knew they were going to win, and there were signs, like, you could look at the polling, and people in my business, we always obsess over polling, and will there be a polling miss, and will he overperform, and all of that. To me, there's a guy named Josh Krasower, who's a really sharp political analyst, who I don't know his politics. I think he's just an honest analyst. He told me, and he taught me years ago, it's less important to pay attention to the noise and to the stats and the polls. It's more insightful to look at the behavior of the candidates and the campaigns. And when you saw the Harris campaign completely change their messaging strategy and their interview strategy sort of on a dime, that, I think, was a red flag for them. On the Trump side of things, I think there were some dead giveaways. Like in 2020, in that election cycle, COVID, all the unrest and violence in the cities, it was a dark time in the country, and he ran, in my opinion, a very dark, dour re-election campaign and ended up losing. In 24, last year, there were just, you could tell that he was having fun. He was enjoying himself. It was a much happier campaign in a lot of ways. And that, to me, was the tell that their internal numbers were showing accurately that he was ahead. The examples I would give were McDonald's. The day at McDonald's, you talk about never seeing an adult man happier. Donald Trump at McDonald's in Pennsylvania when he worked there for a couple hours to try to troll her because she had supposedly worked there, but he's like, I don't think she did. I'm going to work at McDonald's more than she ever did. It was the happiest day of his life, I'm convinced. Like, more than any of his wedding days. Like, he was a kid in a candy store, like when he was being shown how to put the fries into the sleeve without touching it, he was genuinely thrilled. And someone asked him, like, what's your favorite item on the McDonald's menu? He said, we love it all. And I think that's one of the truest things he's ever said. So I remember in 2008, Sarah Palin, when she was picked by McCain as the running mate, famously she was asked, what do you read? I think that was a Katie Couric question. What do you read? And unfortunately, I think she took the bait and fell for it and kind of panicked. And she said, I just read all of them, which was not, in my view, a great answer. In Trump's case, when he was asked, what's your favorite thing on the McDonald's menu? And he basically gave the same answer. It was totally authentic and true. He loves deeply every single thing on the McDonald's menu. So to serve it, then they had the drive-through of people who love him. So he's giving McDonald's that he loves to people who love him. It's just the best day of his life. He's waving out the drive-through window to the press, like trolling them. The smile on his face, he's not a big smile guy, right? Not a big laugh guy. He had the time of his life. Then the other one was here in Wisconsin. So the Harris campaign did an event, tried to highlight January 6th in Washington, D.C. at the Ellipse, and they did not want Joe Biden there for all sorts of reasons. I think that's a separate topic we can get into. But they did not want the sitting president, Joe Biden, there, even though it was happening steps from the White House. So they put old Joe in a basement somewhere at the White House doing a Zoom call with Hispanic activists, figuring what possibly could go wrong. Things went wrong. He, in that moment, sort of got grumpy. I think he was probably ticked off that he was not invited to the giant, rally on his backyard, basically. And he told that little Zoom call that Trump supporters were garbage. He called basically half the country garbage, which then overshadowed the Harris event that they were trying to have outside. It took over the news cycle. The next day, Trump was in Green Bay. So he shows up at the airport in Green Bay, and up to the plane pulls a Trump-emblazoned garbage truck. Remember this?
Oh, yeah.
Like, you knew it was a last-minute thing because the garbage truck had not yet been painted gold, which is what he would have wanted, of course. But there's no time for gold, Mr. President. So the Trump truck pulls up. He puts on the reflective vest and gets up there. He's like honking the horn. He's leaning out the window again. And then he attends the rally that night, and he walks out on stage to the lectern, and he still is wearing the vest. And he said in his opening, my staff wanted me to wear the vest. He said, we're not going to wear the vest. No, I'm going to wear a suit. They said, sir, it's very slimming. He said, we're wearing the vest. And it was this self-deprecating, lighter side that was largely absent in 20. That was something he was leaning into in 24. This is, of course, after he was almost killed, right? There was a sense that he was maybe kind of liberated and enjoying himself. And that was the body language, so to speak, of the campaign that I think ultimately, looking back, made it clear that they were expecting to win, and then they did. And so they had their people lined up. The Senate, like at warp speed, confirmed the team. Whether you liked them or not, it was extremely efficient. And they had that opening drive ready to go. They executed it. And we've had some bumpiness with tariffs and stuff since then. The approval number has come down from where it was, but he did get a honeymoon from voters, which he did not get the first time out. Right in that sense, I think it's like night and day difference between the first go-around and the second.
Well, it's a good segue to some questions about policy and where they're moving with the legislative agenda. I am glad you rolled out your Trump impersonation. That's good. He also does a great Dana Carvey impersonating Tom Brokaw. So at some point, we'll see if that gets worked into this. But let's move from sort of the first few weeks where they do the full court press and really get a lot of things in place. Something that means a lot in this room are tariffs. And so the tariffs have been a bit chaotic and maybe a little bit psychotic, and it has a big impact on our business. The things that we buy, aluminum, steel, copper, these are sort of centerpieces of this agenda. Where do you think those end up?
I would say that if I were in your shoes in Wisconsin watching the president's pronouncements on tariffs, I would be very glad that I'm in a heavy drinking state, because I would just have a heavy supply ready to go at all times, because the truthful answer is I have absolutely no idea where this is going to go. And I absolutely believe as well that if I were to just disappear and I were to be replaced right now by the Treasury Secretary, he would also not know. He wouldn't say that. Secretary Benson, I think, is a very smart, reasonable guy. I think he's a great pick. But I think he's kind of living every day waiting to see what might drop on Truth Social or whatever. So it's hard to analyze the question, because Trump will make a huge splash making some announcement of 50% tariffs on the EU. And then within sometimes hours, it's paused. Yeah. right? We got the China pause extended, I think, for another 90 days. I think he announced something else this morning. That might be paused by now, even. I haven't checked my phone in 10 minutes. So I don't know. My hope is that he will, because I think he actually truly does love tariffs as a concept. This is an area that I've been critical of him on in the campaign and since. I'm not a big tariff guy myself for all sorts of reasons. He also likes winning and success. Yeah. And when the tariffs seem to calm down, the markets take off, the economy. I think a lot of the experts were expecting much darker things than have actually happened. We've had a number of really strong reports on growth and jobs and other things, and I feel like there are two huge X factors here, one of which is the tax policy piece, which we might get to, and then trade, which was kind of this self-inflicted question mark. And if Trump can get around to some sort of stasis, some sort of stability where he can plausibly in some way declare victory, or implausibly, he likes just declaring victory. If he can declare victory, get us to a place of certainty and move on, I think that would be phenomenal for the economy and therefore for him. And I think he probably has quite a few advisors telling him that. He's got other advisors who are true believers in the tariffs, tugging him in the other direction. And it's like, there was a report a few weeks ago that some of the anti-tariff or tariff skeptical high-level staffers basically lured one of the big tariff supporters out of the White House to a meeting so they could get to Trump without the other guy there, which is an interesting move. It's a good power move. I'm not sure it's the best way to run a country and administration, but I personally hope that that side of the discussion ends up prevailing. It's just sort of a question of how long is the road and how bumpy is the road to get there. Or Trump, comes out and triples down on, Liberation Day 2 or something. I genuinely don't know, which is not exactly what you pay me to come here and say. Like, come and tell us things. Like, I don't know, but I don't know, and I would be lying to you if I tried to confidently project any sense of certitude on this issue, because it's a volatile situation that sometimes is day to day. His mood, who talked to him last, some provocation he's seen from a foreign leader, some conciliatory thing he's seen from a foreign leader. It's a guessing game, which is not ideal in my perspective, but it is what it is.
Yeah, we like certainty, particularly when we're managing risk and projecting costs. So, I can't predict it either, but I think the unpredictability of it establishes our risk parameters. So I think your perspective is important on how we look at things going forward, at least in the next, as we project costs for 2 to 5 years. So that's really good insight. But you mentioned the tax bill, and when you start the answer, you say big beautiful bill in Trump's voice. I'd appreciate that. That'd be great. But what do you think the prospects are of the big beautiful bill? And I think it'd be better if they called it the tax cut bill, but we're calling it the big beautiful bill. Where's it going?
Well, I think part of the reason he coined the phrase big beautiful bill,
there you go,
is that it's not just the tax bill. There's actually a lot of other things in there. There's energy component of course, as you know. Yeah. There's immigration enforcement. There's a number of things that are definite sweeteners for virtually every Republican in Congress. A lot of the discussion is around the tax side of it. By the way, on the Trump impression, the one thing I just want to say is I think my favorite thing that Trump does when he speaks publicly is very occasionally they convince him, sir, you must read exactly what's written from the teleprompter, right? Because he doesn't like that. He doesn't like staying on script at all. And there's just like so many chunks of hair that have been pulled out from advisors' heads as he wanders off script, including at the RNC in Milwaukee, by the way. I was sitting sort of behind the stage. I watched the teleprompter. I would say his speech that went on forever was probably like 20% teleprompter, 80% whatever he was doing. But also like he had a bandage on his head because he'd been shot, so it's like, let him go, right? It's like from Animal House, he's rolling, let him go. But sometimes they convince me you've got to read the prompter. And it's funny because it's very clear sometimes that he is reading these words sometimes on national television for the very first time. So we're all discovering his speech with him together at the same time. So he'll be reading and he'll be very well behaved and he'll be reading a line and then he'll stop, he'll go, it's so true. That's so important. And it's like, yes, I'm glad you're endorsing your own speech, Mr. President. You're on board. It's good. It's so true. On the big, beautiful bill, I think some version of it is going to pass. On your point, certainty, business, to have both of these realms racked with uncertainty, tariffs, trade, and the tax side is just a really bad combination. Businesses need to plan. And having that kind of double-barreled chaos is not conducive to planning. Trump, as a business guy, I think definitely knows it on the tax side. He's been pushing very hard for it. Speaker Johnson just sort of keeps pulling these rabbits out of a hat. He's got almost no margin. On the vote that just happened where they passed it out of the House, it was a 1-vote margin because 2 of them were asleep. Did you read this? 2 of the Republicans slept through the vote. I'm like, you had one job, man. Like, you got to be, and that's also a staff issue. Like, if you're staffing that guy, it's like the one reason he's here is to vote, and to have 2 of them sleep through it is crazy. But they still got it done by 1 vote. It pings over to the Senate. There's different dynamics over there. I am sympathetic to the people like Senator Johnson and some others who would like to see more meaningful spending restraint in the bill, but there's another side of it, more moderates who want, less Medicaid reform and all these SALT deductions in these, high tax blue states. So it is a very, very fine line to walk. Johnson, I think, has defied expectations repeatedly. He's been a very good speaker. He is the opposite of Trump in a lot of ways. Trump is this big, sort of bombastic New York, I don't have to explain Donald Trump to you. Johnson is sort of smaller, quieter, religious man from Louisiana, very honest, very respected. And the 2 of them together are this odd couple that are actually quite effective, right? Trump comes from one angle on it, Johnson comes from the other angle, and so far, at least, on some of these really tough, tight votes, they've gotten it done. So, if you talk to Leader Thune, which I do from time to time in the Senate side, he's got Josh Hawley, for example, from Missouri squawking about one thing. He's got the Rand Pauls and Ron Johnsons on the other side of it. I think they'll probably change the bill a little bit, then they'll ping it back to the House. Whether the House accepts it whole and it becomes law or they go to conference, I don't know. But I think if you talk to elected Republicans, all of them on the Hill, they will say we have to get this done. Failure is not an option. The number one reason being, if they don't extend the tax cuts, there will be a $4 trillion tax increase on the American people at the end of the year. And after 4 years of inflation in the previous administration and costs going up, the last thing that this country needs is a $4 trillion tax increase. And it's not just that they talk about the rich and the millionaires and the billionaires. It is every single income group in the country would see a tax increase. The average family would be 4 figures, depending on what state you live in, $1,500, $3,000, I saw in California, $3,600 average tax increase. That's something that maybe the wealthy can absorb. I know former Speaker Pelosi referred to these types of numbers as crumbs during the last tax debate. It might be crumbs to her, it's not crumbs to most people. And so there is an urgent need to make sure that those tax cuts don't expire. I think the Republicans need to do a better job of conveying that urgency. Like, your tax increase across every income group is automatic if we don't act. So I think they understand that. They're going to get some version of it done. There was a CBO score, this is sort of in the weeds today, that the Democrats are going to jump on. The Republicans will point out that the Congressional Budget Office got a lot of things wrong when they projected what would happen under the last tax bill, which Trump signed. Right? They called it Armageddon. The opponents called it Armageddon, made all these predictions, virtually every single one of which was proven wrong. And the economy took off and was cooking with gas until COVID hit. I think with Trump, one of the critiques I've made is leaning in on the tariffs as much as he has. And the response that I'll get is, well, he campaigned on it. And that is true. He did talk about tariffs. He said it's his favorite word in the English language. And then he was just like, oh, just kidding, like Bible, God, then tariffs, right? So, but he loves tariffs. That being said, I think the thrust of his campaign and his message on the economy, while he, yes, did mention tariffs, the overall message that I think trickled down to voters that they intuitively got was, make the economy 2019 again. If we could go back to a 2019 economy, I think the vast majority of the country would be very happy about that. And you look at the policies that led to a roaring economy right before COVID hit, if they can align their policy priorities to that, I think they do themselves and the country a lot of good, because when the economy does well, generally voters are happy and will tend to reward the people presiding over that economy.
Yeah, so playing off the Pelosi, it's Crumb's comment, if that, they seem to be in the wilderness right now. Can they get out? How do they emerge from the political wilderness?
So I think the wish casting, slam dunk, sort of conservative answer is the Democrats are nuts and they're in the wilderness and they're going to stay there. And I think some of that is true. I think that they have gotten very extreme and picked really stupid fights to have, and they'll get 80-20 issues and take the wrong side of it and do so very indignantly and very self-righteously and turning off huge numbers of people. You look at the shifts to the right in the last election among almost every single demographic. One of my friends likes to say the Democrats lost a character argument to Donald Trump, which is a feat, but they did. They're all fighting amongst themselves about who's really to blame for the Biden scandal with his decline and all the lying about that. So absolutely, it's a wilderness moment for the Democratic Party, and you're seeing different factions of that coalition trying to fill the void and say, well, the real solution is us, right? So the more moderates are going to say, we can't be so crazy progressive. Look at what that did to us. And progressives say, well, we didn't really try true progressivism. We've got, let's amplify stronger voices. People want a real contrast with Trump. They want to fight, the sort of AOC world, and then other people who are trying to sort of straddle various elements of their coalition. I think it's going to be a challenge for them in a lot of ways. They seem to not be able to help themselves in a number of ways. They keep saying, well, we want to look forward. Whenever they're asked questions about the Biden situation, well, we want to look forward. Well, I'm sorry, you all lied about his condition for at least 2 years. And then the lie blew up on the debate stage, and then you threw out your own election and put someone else in. And you had this presidency by cabal, at least at times, over the period of months, which is unbelievably unconstitutional and outrageous in my view. So I don't think I am terribly inclined to just get over that quickly and move on to the next spin and the next gaslighting program they're going to do. All that being said, I think being realistic is important as well. And here are some uncomfortable facts for the Republicans that are also, I think, probably heartening for the Democrats. One of the reasons that Trump won, and won the popular vote, and swept the swing states, as he likes to remind everyone of all these things, and they're all true. Part of the reason he pulled that all off is because, and there's a guy named David Shore who's a data analyst on the left, and he's gone a deep dive into this, and it's like enough to make his fellow leftists just panic and pass out, because a lot of the data is actually quite unnerving for them. But part of the reason Trump was able to pull it off is he got a lot of what we call low propensity voters to turn out for him. People who don't show up faithfully every election. They might show up for the big ones, right? And Trump is this larger than life character. He pulled people out of the woodwork. He converted sort of soft, maybe prior Democrats to say, I don't like what's happening, inflation and all of that. I'm gonna try something new. That was a recipe that worked incredibly well for the Republicans, and Trump especially in 2024. But among the high propensity voters, the parties have sort of switched places in the last few years. For years, like over the whole beginning of my career, the lower the turnout, generally the better Republicans did. And the Democrats would say, the more people vote, the more we win. That's not true anymore. The high propensity vote has shifted to the left. A lot of these college-educated, suburban, particularly white folks with college degrees, they used to be reliable Republicans. They are much more blue-tinted now. And they show up every single time to vote, from dog catcher on a random Thursday in May all the way up to a presidential election, whereas the new coalition that Republicans need to rely on to win don't show up for those kinds of elections. So, I mean, you look here in the state of Wisconsin, they had that very important Supreme Court race, a month ago, 2 months ago?
April.
And it was a 10-point spread for the Dems. Republicans actually had a decent turnout, but the Democrats, every single one of their voters crawled over broken glass to participate, and effectively the left-wing candidate won in a state that Trump had carried just months prior. And I think we'll see this in special elections. I think we'll probably see it to some extent in the midterm elections. That's more of a Super Bowl election, so I'm not sure. But the off-year elections in Virginia, New Jersey, specials, the Supreme Court race, off-year spring race you had here, Supreme Court, those are more likely to be a positive outcome for Democrats because of their base being highest propensity voters. And Republicans, it's an issue that the Republicans have to figure out, because I'm not sure how great the trade is. If you can have an advantage every 4 years in the big election for president, you'll take it. But if that means having a coalition that is then disadvantaged in all the other intervening elections, those are important elections with a lot of power and issues at stake. So a party that seems to be completely lost and in the wilderness can almost by default find itself winning again. I think back, and this is the last example that I'll give, I remember the Democrats were feeling really arrogant after Barack Obama won re-election in 2012. And they were talking about the coalition of the ascendant. We're never going to lose again. Look at all these demographics moving our way. All these Republican voters are going to die off, and then we'll be in power forever. Well, oops, that hasn't worked out very well, because some of their demographics have shifted to the right for all sorts of reasons. Things always change in politics. And after 2012, the Democrats were like, we got this, and the Republicans were a mess. They put together this autopsy of the election and all the things that we did wrong and all the things the Republicans have to change, virtually every single one of which was the exact opposite of Donald Trump. And then he became the nominee and won, right? So it shows you what the experts sometimes know, these political class people. But in 2013, shortly after Obama's re-election, he's re-inaugurated. The Republicans are doing these pointless filibusters on Obamacare that have no chance of working, and like we've just got to fight, and their approval ratings in the toilet and all of that. And in the 2014 midterm elections, the Republicans got to, I believe, 247 House seats and gained 9 Senate seats that year. They went from total wilderness to +9 on the Senate side a year later. So I think some of the doom and gloom on the left is overwrought, although they seem to not be helping themselves, which I'm fine with. And I think some of the triumphalism on the right it's always stupid in politics. It's never, who used to say this? It was a few major figures would talk about this, that politics, it's never as good as you may hope, and it's never as bad as you may fear. Things change, people move, voters can be persuaded. And the last thing I'll say, heading into the midterms and the wilderness question, is a lot of it depends on what the economy looks and feels like a year from now. Right? If we were having this exact event, if I were here next year, feel free to have me back. Yeah, but if I'm here next year and the economy is really going gangbusters and things have turned around and we're seeing some good movement, Trump's negative numbers on the economy are starting to improve. If we're back in a good, strong economy, I think the Republicans will have a much better chance, certainly to hold on to the Senate, let's say, in the midterm elections. If the bottom falls out for whatever reason and the tariffs slam or whatever happens, then the Democrats, even despite their record low polling, by default as the opposition party, with a demoralized Republican base and a rabid, energized Democratic base, would stand to have a blue wave, even being extremely unpopular. So events, political dynamics matter, events and how the people are feeling about their lives matter more.
Great. Well, thanks for that. And I think before we get to audience questions, I want to kind of transition away from direct political questions and maybe think about something more personal interest or personal. Working at Fox News for as long as you have, what's been your most memorable day at Fox News?
One of them definitely would have been the election of 2016, which I told that story earlier. I'll never forget that. And what was crazy about that night, 2016 election, was, I was sitting there, as I mentioned, George Will, this venerable columnist who's been around forever. He wasn't, super into technology, shockingly. He wrote a whole Washington Post column decrying blue jeans. So like the fact that he's not like conversant on Twitter is not surprising to me, but he's very smart, very nice guy. And he was sitting next to me and I kept giving him updates all night long. He's like, how's that race looking? How's, Virginia 10 looking? So I would go on and give him little updates. As the night progressed and, the first domino fell was, the big one I think was Florida, then Ohio fell, and it's like, okay, this is interesting. And then that famous blue wall, right? The tipping point finally was Pennsylvania, but the blue wall started to look really vulnerable for the Democrats. And over the course of the night, so at the time it was my colleague Brett Baer was co-hosting the election coverage with Megyn Kelly, who was with us at the time, who's a friend of mine. And they're making, they do the Fox News alerts with the sound effect that many of you know, the whoosh, boom, Fox can now project. And then the little square right outside Fox headquarters in New York, they call it Fox Plaza or Fox Square, people started showing up. People started leaving their apartments in New York to the point that toward the end of the night, I'm convinced every Republican in Manhattan was outside Fox News. I mean, I'm talking tens of people were out there. And as they're calling these races, even though we have very thick, bulletproof, blast-resistant glass and all that, unfortunately, is necessary, the crowd did get big enough, all joking aside, where you could actually hear them out on the street. And when they announced Trump had won the whole enchilada, there was just stunned disbelief, even among people who supported him in the studio, and outside was just this roar of sound from people. It was the ultimate upset victory, right? It was like, no one expected this, and then it happened, and the announcement comes down, and a few hours later, we waited until the very wee hours of the night, and Trump gave his hastily written victory speech. And then, they played the music. I don't think it was the YMCA yet, but they played the music. That's such an interesting choice, but whatever. It is a dance that white people can do, so I'll give him that. Even I can do that after a drink or two. But he left the stage, and George Will, who was a big critic of Trump, and this gives a sense of how baked in the expectation was of the loss, Trump's loss. George Will, I'll never forget this, he stood up. He said, "Well, young man, thank you very much for all of your help and your assistance and the information." And he looked at his watch. He's like, "It's quite late, but I have to go back to my hotel and completely rewrite a column." Because he had pre-written the column that Trump had lost, not unreasonably. And then that column, all the reasons why, had to be thrown basically in the garbage and rewritten for the new reality. So that would definitely be up there. There's a few other examples I could give. Actually, you know what? I'll come back to my Milwaukee story and the Uber driver. So I was in Milwaukee for that Republican presidential debate in 2023. Trump did not participate, and he was effectively running as an incumbent. And so he decided, I'm not going to really engage with these people. I'm just going to be the big dog, and they can all squabble. And I hated that because, full disclosure, I was definitely ready to move on and vote for someone else to be the nominee. But strategically, it was 100% the right move. He made the right call. His campaign was very smart not to engage. So you had all the others on stage. It was a Fox-hosted debate at the Bucks Arena. And Fiserv, is that Fiserv Forum? Something like that. And so it was DeSantis and Nikki Haley and that whole crew. And after the debate ended, I was going to the airport. So I was in an Uber heading to Milwaukee Airport, and I had my luggage in the trunk, and I had forgotten to take off my press badge lanyards. And the woman who was driving me to the airport was a woman in her 40s, I would guess, pretty young woman, black. And she looked at me in the rearview mirror, and she saw the lanyards. She said, "Were you here for the debate?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "Were you with a campaign?" I said, "No, ma'am." She said, "Are you with media?" I said, "Yes." "Which one?" Well, here we go. Everyone knows where I work and has an opinion about it. So it's like, Fox News, ma'am. So then she was like, "Well, I've got this guy trapped in my car, so I'm going to say some things." That was like literally a captive audience. She starts teeing off on Trump and all these things, and January 6th and all of it. And by the way, some of her points I agreed with, but she was kind of, not rudely, but sort of reading me the riot act a little bit. She's like, I've got this Fox News dude in my backseat, and I'm going to give him a piece of my mind. So I'm taking it. I am sort of wondering, like, if I were to roll out of the car, like on the highway, could I survive that? I don't know. But I decided, all my luggage is in the back. That's stupid. So I'm just like, I'll just sit there and politely listen. And then I realized at some point she got it all out of her system, and then she pivoted. And I realized all the other stuff was a lead up, a preamble, throat clearing to get to what she actually wanted to say. She said, all that said, do you have kids? At the time I didn't. I said, not yet, ma'am. And she said, do you know how much chicken costs? I said, do you know how much it costs to feed my family? She said, I drive Uber. I have another job. She said, I drive Uber because my mom's sick, and I have to take care of her, and I need extra money. To fill up this car every day costs me so much more each morning than it used to. And she starts going through how difficult life recently has been for her, and all of a sudden, I feel like I'm living through a Republican ad. It turns into a Republican ad. And her voice trailed off, and I thought maybe she might have been finished. And I looked in the rearview mirror from the back seat, and I could see that she actually had tears in her eyes. And she said, we can't take it out here like this much longer. She said, I cannot, I swear to God, I told this story at the time. She said, I cannot stand that man, and I won't vote for him, but my life was better under him, and a lot of my friends are going to vote for him. And I think back to that moment a lot, because here I am, this political commentator who gets paid to give opinions and to know what's happening. I feel like she knew what was up in this election before a lot of people in my line of work did. And I think back to that one little interaction, then the through line to Trump at McDonald's having a good time, to November, and looking back, no one, unlike 2016, no one should have been surprised by the outcome of the election in 2024.
That's fascinating. Well, we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. This has been absolutely delightful, so thank you. We've got some microphones set up, and if there's any questions in the audience, come up to the mic and introduce yourself. See somebody moving in, and then ask your questions. I'm not as good as seeing through spotlights as you, so.
It's 2 mics.
All right. Anybody up for a question? I see. There's one. There's one. All right, there we go. Because I've got one about the Backstreet Boys, but I'll hold off.
I have one question, and you touched about it a little bit, but can you give us and follow up a little more on what you were saying about Trump as a person, and give us your insight, being at your level, you have probably met with him on a one-to-one basis. Can you give us your insight about him as a person, about his moral, his character, his behind-the-scenes presence that maybe we don't know anything about?
Mm-hmm. So it's a great question, and maybe this will surprise you. I have never met him. Now, here's what's interesting about that. I was invited to the vice president's house for dinner. I went to Russia with the Secretary of State. I went to France with the National Security Advisor. I had scotch on a regular basis with the Attorney General. I knew the team. Never met him. I can tell you this, though. He definitely knows who I am because he watches our network a lot. Okay, so in the first Trump administration, sometimes the best way to affect policy or decisions was to appear on Fox. So like, I remember one time he had kicked the Republican leaders out of a room, and he was negotiating directly with Schumer and Pelosi on some spending deal. And I was really worried that this was gonna be a bad deal and that the Democrats might get the better of him. So I literally called a friend of mine who's on Fox and Friends production team, that's our morning show, which Trump watched religiously. Trump would call in. Trump would see something, and he would call in, like, talk for 45 minutes. They like, blow out commercials. So he was almost always watching Fox and Friends in the morning. So I called up, I said, can you put me on tomorrow? They're like, okay. What time? I'm like, it probably doesn't matter. He's up at all hours. So usually when I'm getting ready to go on TV, I'll have maybe 3 points that I want to make, and if I'm lucky, I'll get to 2 of them, and I sort of like, what's my best? That day, I had a different approach. I wanted to influence the president, who had a good chance of watching that show. So I literally researched and printed out negative, mean comments about him from Pelosi and Schumer. And I went on the air. It's like, oh, good morning, Steve. Good to see you. Listen carefully, Mr. President. Right? I didn't say that, but like I said, I want to remind our audience some of the nasty things that Chuck and Nancy have said about our president, and just started reading them. And the deal did blow up later that day. A few of my friends were like, did you do that? I'm like, I might have done that. So that's sort of wild. He would occasionally tweet. Back when he was on Twitter, he would tweet things that I had said, and my phone would just explode, right? Because it's like all the responses and all the crazy feedback from that. I heard, so I did an event in Wyoming, and with my best friend, Mary Catherine Ham, she's another Fox contributor, we're very close, we wrote the book together. So we were backstage, this was 10 years ago, and or almost 10 years ago, it's about 8 years ago. We're backstage, and it's a small donor event in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and I look back through the curtain and I see front and center are Jared and Ivanka. Okay, so part of our shtick that we would do, crossing the country, promoting the book, we would criticize Trump on certain things, and I would do the Trump impression. And I turned to her, I'm like, am I doing the Trump impression in front of Ivanka Trump? Like, I was a little nervous about that. Are we going to critique him? We just decided, you know what? They're here, they're adults, we're going to stick with the plan, say what we believe, do the whole shtick. So I did it, and it seemed to go over well. I avoided eye contact like the plague with them. I was like in the front row, I was like, no, I don't want to read their body language at all. And the event ended, and everyone went off to lunch, and Mary Catherine and I were sort of debriefing afterwards, and into the room from the back of the ballroom came this very well put together young woman, and she said, Ms. Trump would like to have a word with you. And it was like getting called to the principal's office. That's exactly how it felt. I was like, okay. So Ivanka came in, and she, first of all, was unbelievably warm, stunningly beautiful. Like, I was not anticipating how pretty she was in person, and she could not have been any nicer. And she said, I've already ordered your book, and I really loved what you said and all of this. And at one point, some policy came up, and I said, just kind of gingerly, I'm like, well, you know, I don't always support the president. And just for an instant, she went ice cold, and she said, we know. There's a list. There's the good, bad, and not sure about them list, I think, in his mind and in the White House. And I think I'm on the not sure about it list. I told the story last night. He called me once, and I missed the call. That was my big shot. I had a shot to have a phone call with him. I missed the call for a good reason. I was in church. But it was Good Friday. So I don't have an insight, aside from saying, apparently, what you see is what you get, but he can be quite funny, charming, self-deprecating, thoughtful in a way that isn't. So go and watch, if you find it on YouTube, Bill Maher, left-leaning comedian from HBO. He's been extremely critical of Trump for years. He was invited to the White House by Trump for dinner. And the next week, he went on his show and gave a long monologue about his experience with Trump. And it was eye-opening. There's another side to the man that a lot of people don't see. I have heard that as well. But how he is behind closed doors, interesting. More important to me is who he is publicly, the decisions that he makes, et cetera. So sorry if that's a disappointing answer. Maybe in the second term, I'll get the invite. Maybe I won't miss the call next time.
All right, well, thank you very much. I don't see anybody else standing up. And just a little bit about Guy's daily schedule. So when he landed yesterday, you did your radio show from the airport?
From an airport hotel, airport hotel in Minneapolis.
All right. He's leaving here today to go back to the Charmont and do his radio show. So quite a lifestyle you've chosen for yourself. And we're just so delighted that you would spend some time with us and have this conversation. It's been really, really nice.
Well, it happens to be one of the swingiest areas of one of the swingiest states in the country. So coming here and meeting you guys, having some beer, having some cheese, talking politics, it's like a dream come true. So it is a real honor to be here. You guys have been great. Thank you very, very much for having me, truly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful job. Thank you so much.